At exactly 2:17 a.m., Ethan was lying awake in his small rented apartment on the outskirts of Chicago, staring at the ceiling while the city slept outside his window, the faint hum of distant traffic mixing with the ticking wall clock that sounded far too loud in the silence, each tick landing inside his head like it was striking something buried deep. And with every passing second, it felt less like time was moving forward and more like a hidden truth was slowly forcing its way up, a truth he had locked away years ago inside a part of his mind he never allowed himself to visit. Because his life had become a safe routine that required no real thinking. Work downtown, late-night takeout, scrolling on his phone, sleeping just enough to survive and repeating it all again. But that night, the routine cracked, and through that crack came a voice, calm but unsettling, whispering that he was running again. And although he tried to dismiss it as stress or lack of sleep, the human mind doesn't stay quiet once it decides it's time to speak. And the next morning at his office, everything looked normal to everyone else. Emails, meetings, polite smiles, but inside there was a strange emptiness, a subtle disconnection, as if his body was present but his sense of self was standing a few steps behind, something psychologists call dissociation, when awareness becomes too painful and the mind creates distance to survive. And that evening, when an old dust-covered notebook slipped out of the back of his closet and hit the floor, it didn't feel like an accident at all, but more like a deliberate move by his own subconscious, because that notebook was a gate, and the very first line written inside it, "If you're reading this, it means you've forgotten again," sent a chill through his spine. Since forgetting memories is one thing, but forgetting that you intentionally chose to forget is far more terrifying. And as he kept reading, he realized the notebook wasn't a diary, but an emergency record left behind by his own mind, explaining that every human being lives with three mental rooms, one they show to the world, one they hide from themselves, and a third where the truth is locked away because remembering it would destroy them. And Ethan had sealed that third room when he was 15, because at that age, the mind doesn't choose what's right or wrong, it chooses survival. And the moment he mentally stepped closer to that locked room, his head began to ache and his breathing grew heavy, because when suppressed memories try to resurface, the brain treats them like danger and creates physical pain to push you back. But this time he didn't stop, because living half a life had become more unbearable than facing a few moments of pain, and suddenly he was pulled back into a night from his teenage years in a quiet suburban neighborhood in Ohio, a night when the fear inside the house didn't come from his father as he had always believed, but from outside, when his mother's eyes didn't hold the fear of a parent losing control, but the terror of someone trying desperately to protect her family, when his father wasn't raging but broken, exhausted, and afraid, and when the man standing outside the door wasn't a vague shadow but a real threat his mind later erased because remembering the true source of danger was harder than inventing a villain. And the decision that followed wasn't dramatic or heroic, but instinctive, a door being slammed shut in a single second, but that one moment shaped Ethan's entire psychological future. Because in that second, he saved someone and lost someone at the same time. And when a person realizes their own action changed another person's fate forever, the mind reshapes reality to survive the weight of guilt, which is why for years his father became the monster in his memories, because if his father was evil, then Ethan could remain innocent, and if he was innocent, he could keep living without collapsing under the truth. Yet the mind cannot survive on deception forever, and that was why his relationships stayed shallow, his happiness felt incomplete, and his nights stretched endlessly, because psychology tells us that when someone can't forgive themselves, they unconsciously choose a quiet punishment, a life that is neither fully lived nor fully escaped. And now that the third room had finally opened, Ethan understood that he was neither purely a victim nor purely guilty, but a terrified teenager who made the only choice his nervous system allowed at that moment. And that realization didn't arrive with a breakdown or a dramatic scream, because truth rarely does. It arrived quietly, like acceptance, the kind that doesn't erase pain but reshapes it. And when morning light filled the apartment and a therapy session reminder lit up on his phone, he didn't delete it for the first time, because he finally understood that healing doesn't come from forgetting, but from understanding, and that every human mind contains a third room. The difference is that some people never open it, some pretend it doesn't exist, and some spend their entire lives running from it. but the ones who dare to sit inside that room and face themselves may never return to an easy life, yet they gain something far more important, a life that is honest, grounded, and real. If you're listening to this story late at night, there's something you should understand before going any further. Once the mind starts remembering what it buried, it doesn't stop just because you ask it to. And Ethan learned that the hard way on the very first day he decided not to delete the therapy reminder on his phone. Because the moment he acknowledged that message, something subtle but irreversible shifted inside him, like a locked door cracking open just enough for air to rush in. And air, when it enters a sealed room, doesn't just bring oxygen, it brings dust, noise, and everything that was quietly sitting there for years waiting to be disturbed. And as Ethan stood by his apartment window watching the city skyline wake up, he felt a strange combination of relief and dread. Relief because for the first time in years he wasn't running, and dread because he didn't yet understand what would happen if he stayed. And that fear followed him all the way to the therapist's office, a clean, quiet space in a downtown building where the walls were neutral and the lighting was soft, designed specifically to make people feel safe. Though safety, Ethan was about to learn, is not the same as comfort, because comfort lies in avoidance, while safety demands honesty. And as he sat across from Dr. Miller, a woman with calm eyes and a voice that didn't rush or push, she asked him a question that sounded simple but landed like a punch to the chest. When was the first time you remember feeling afraid in your own home? And for a moment, Ethan almost gave the easy answer, the rehearsed one, the story he had told himself for years about anger and control and fear, but something stopped him, something deeper than logic, and instead he said, slowly, "I don't think I was afraid of my home, I think I was afraid for it." And the silence that followed was heavy, not awkward but loaded, because Dr. Miller understood exactly what that meant, that fear is not always about being harmed, but sometimes about being forced to choose. And choices made under fear have a way of haunting us long after the danger has passed. And over the next several sessions, Ethan began to realize that his mind hadn't just hidden a memory, it had constructed an entire identity around avoiding it. Every relationship he kept shallow, every emotional distance he maintained, every time he walked away before someone could truly know him, it wasn't because he didn't want connection, it was because connection required honesty, and honesty threatened the fragile balance his mind had built to keep him functioning. And as memories continued to surface in fragments, sounds, sensations, half-images, he noticed something unsettling. The more he remembered, the more his present began to feel unfamiliar, as if the version of himself he had been living as was slowly dissolving, replaced by someone heavier, quieter, but more real. And one night, weeks into therapy, as he lay awake again at nearly the same hour, 2:14 a.m., he felt the presence of that inner voice return, not accusatory this time, but observant, almost curious, whispering that he was running again. And Ethan realized then that even healing could become a form of avoidance if you try to manage it too tightly, because the mind doesn't heal by force, it heals by allowance. And allowance means accepting outcomes you cannot predict, including the possibility that forgiveness doesn't feel like relief at first, that it may feel like grief, because when you forgive yourself, you also grieve the version of you that never got to be innocent again. And this realization deepened when Ethan finally allowed himself to remember what happened after that night in Ohio, how the police had come, how questions were asked and carefully unanswered, how adults made decisions to protect what could still be protected, and how a 15-year-old boy learned, without anyone saying it out loud, that silence can be a form of love and also a lifelong burden. And as these memories settled into place, Ethan began to notice changes not just internally but externally. His dreams grew more vivid, his emotional reactions less numb, and people around him commented that they seemed different, more present, though none of them could explain why. And the truth was that presence is expensive. It costs you your defenses, your excuses, your carefully edited narrative. And one evening, after a particularly intense session, Dr. Miller said something that stayed with him long after he left his office. The mind doesn't ask whether you deserve peace. It only asks whether you are willing to tolerate truth. And that sentence echoed through Ethan's thoughts as he walked through the city streets, realizing that all these years he had been trying to earn peace by punishing himself, believing subconsciously that suffering was the price of survival. But peace, real peace, is not payment-based, it's permission-based, and granting yourself that permission feels dangerously close to letting go, and letting go feels like betrayal to the past, to the people involved, to the pain that once kept you alive. And that internal conflict came to a head the night Ethan received a call from his mother, her voice older now, softer, asking him if he remembered certain things, carefully, hesitantly, as if she too was testing whether the past was still sealed. And in that moment, Ethan understood something profound. He wasn't the only one who locked the door to that night. Everyone involved had, and each in their own way, and reopening it meant disrupting not just his own identity, but the fragile peace others had built around it. And this realization introduced a new psychological tension, one far more complex than guilt, the fear of destabilizing others by healing himself, because growth doesn't happen in isolation, it sends ripples. And